My name is Sarri Elfaitouri. I am a Libyan artist, architect, and a curator. I'm currently based in Benghazi, in the east of Libya. I have a bachelor's degree in architecture, and recently I've earned a master's degree in urban design. And I'm also mainly practicing in the studio that I founded in 2019 called Tajarrud, which is an architecture and urbanism design studio. I'll share the screen now and let me do presenter view. Okay, did it show up? Great. So we'll be talking about radical urbanism and some strategies and tactics and techniques of how could urban design address social and political issues in our cities and how art can take place as well. And what's interesting to mention is that as I said, I had a bachelor degree in architecture, and usually architecture is a small scale operation, not really always small scale, but it's an object. It focuses on a building. And relating this to art, because I'm also practicing as an artist, art practice is a different scale. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it could be bigger, but usually urban design is such a stretch. I remember when I first started my master's studies, the task of just zooming out and studying the city and then gradually zooming in until we reach, let's say, an art installation scale, it's such it really trains your brain to make multi-scalar connections between the city, enlarge its social, political, cultural systems, but then all the way to the tactical and very articulate intervention. So we'll be talking about mainly 5 tools, and the first one is counter mapping, and we will see what those tools mean in practice in the next slides. We'll talk about strategy, phasing, system diagrams, and tactical curation. So first, counter mapping. Edward Said said in 1994 that in the history of colonial invasion, maps are always first drawn by the victors. Since maps are instruments of conquest, geography, therefore, is the art of war, but it can also be the art of resistance if there is a counter map and a counter strategy. This project I worked on in my first semester, and the site was in the Newtown Creek neighborhood in New York. And the title is Reclaiming 1,000 Creeks. Newtown Creek is a hyper-cultural district. So speaking of counter mapping, this is where counter mapping, which is basically, I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with it, is mapping against power structures. However, you're using the language of mapping, you're using it as if when you're writing a text, you're critiquing an authority or a system in the map. You're also critiquing that, but in a different graphical language. So this is the narrative and the counter mapping of the project, and it says 1,000 creeks mythology. Once there have been 1,000 creeks, amongst which is the Mespatchis Creek, so called today the Newtown Creek, and of course it's a Native American land, so that starts from there. 1,000 creeks have been freely flowing with indigenous spirits and nomadic bodies, and ultimate harmony between culture, humans, and nature. 1,000 creeks have been colonized by the Dutch and the British industrial machinery. 1,000 live-in arteries in creeks, erasing culture and causing a rupture in the historical, natural, and social fabrics of 1,000 creeks, making them lose their vital organs, fragments, and spaces. 1,000 creeks dominated by colonial creekness, a homogeneous idea of creek/nature. 1,000 creeks have been replaced by a new idea, a new town creekness or toxic urbanity, the still living root ideology behind the gentrification and abandonment of Newtown Creek. Newtown Creekness becomes this contradiction that constantly lives in the tension between preservation and development, past and future, nature and pollution, connection and disconnection, the visible and the invisible. However, 1,000 Creeks will soon reconcile these contradictions and develop an alternative strategy for reclamation and the revival of its lost fragments. 1,000 Creeks, aware of its disjointed organs, wakes up from under the paving, oily, toxic stones, rebels and turns into 1,000 arms, into tactical promenades to reunite its lost natural, historical, and cultural micro-narratives. 1,000 Creeks generates an alternative theory, the counter Newtown Creekness theory, which means urbanization as deterritorializing conceptual and historical roots to reterritorialize its spatial and cultural fragments and redraw the city. 1,000 Creeks, therefore, is more than a mythology, but a methodology as well. So this is a map that's also considered as a counter map, and it shows how the gentrification pattern is affecting the neighborhood. And the question is that how can we radically approach the roots of gentrification and pollution, because the creek is suffering from contamination as well, and how can we stimulate the public imaginary and collectively generate counter strategies. And so you see here in the squares and the rectangles institutions that are mapped. These are art institutions and cultural organizations and political institutions as well. And this is part of mapping potential alliances that could work on this, on actualizing this project. And the areas that you see in red are the areas that are most suffer, the most the more intense tone of the red is referring to the most gentrified and vulnerable area in the site. This is a map of the Native American, as called here, nomadology, and how the Native Americans were moving from one place to another without, of course, the grid that Jefferson superimposed on the natural landscape. And it also serves as a kind of original counter map. Now, this is a reference from a Dutch architect called Constant, which worked on this project called New Babylon. And his idea was that the city has been divided into functions and sectors and transformation roads, etc. And his idea to revolutionize the city is to kind of create a different level, a second level above the buildings, where art and architecture merge together through a system of installations where you could freely install your settlement in this kind of gigantic overlaid structure. And then this combines the two concepts, the idea of that there are many creeks that are existing, that have existed in the past, which were the paths of the Native American tribes wandering the landscape, and also this idea of the unitary urbanism, or the connected city through art. Now, talking about strategies, this is starting again from the wide scale, and it shows different patterns. So it's a band system, meaning that each band is referring to a certain type of function. And it starts with first the promenade, which is again referring back to the Native American occupation of the indigenous way of occupying land, almost like tiptoeing and freely flowing on the landscape. And then bands of community housing, some bands where we preserve the landscape, and bands of productive landscape where you're producing and creating self-sufficient systems where you eat from what you from your agricultural practice, essentially, and then agglomeration, where all of these systems come together. Also, strategy has a lot to do with, as I said, mapping the strategic alliances. And what we are taught in urban design is to, when you're looking at, let's say you're doing an art project, maybe you're doing already this, but you're not looking at the map, or you might also be looking at the map. But usually we are looking at the sites where we want to install or build, and then look at the organizations that are active, relevant, maybe relevant organizations that are artistic, cultural, architectural, etc. And we then think how we can fund this project. So what are the organizations that have some financial abilities, or maybe other logistical contributions, other maybe artistic and curatorial organizations. And then this shows some tactics that were used to also clarify the intervention on site. So on the right side, it's the site that I worked on, and it's a big site. And in red, you see the creek, and then in the green, you see the productive landscape. And then there are three sites that are nested in this large site, A, B, and C, which are thematic sites. But then the tactics, which are marked with different colors, show what the intention of the intervention is. So infiltrate is about establishing alliances and major events, which will leave then strategic infrastructure for the district to further develop. So an event happens, takes place, and then whatever is left, let's say planting, let's say green infrastructure, it could be green surfaces, plants and trees, water bodies to stay as they are. And then propagate, which is about dedicating educational infrastructure to embrace a collective cultural spirit. Curate is about developing a cultural and artistic community. Cultivate, it's about nurturing the site through green landscape and infrastructure. And proliferate is establishing spaces for living and working. And this is a technique that just makes it clearer for you and also for your audience of what you're trying to do through these action words. And the other important tool is the phasing tool, and it looks at what as in architecture we're not taught to do this. When we're thinking about designing a building, we're not thinking about how the building will age and how it will transform through time in relation to all the political, cultural, social, and ecological flux. So this is mostly an urban and landscape tool, which we think about first the amount of organizing that the initiation of the project requires, and then how it would basically grow and sustain itself over a long period of time. So it's not just about the time where we build. And so here, just to give an example, in 2024, this was supposed to, as if, take place first in action. So first, it's creating an interdisciplinary team, and it consists of local artists, community representatives, social and environmental activists, and then to essentially buy the land acquisition a year after, and then creating an open call. So I was thinking of this as a large, almost called it quinquennale, which happens every, I think, 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. So the Biennale happens every 2 years, and I think the quinquennale happens after every 5 years. And so the open call happens, and then participatory workshops take place. And that's the zero phase, which is the preparation. It takes 2 years. And then you essentially talk about how every phase will operate and how much time it will take. Not to go through all of them, but to mention some. One of the elements in the infra-archaeology's phase, which is phase one, is to create district administrative offices, and these are meant to be joined by local representatives and be essential as if project managers of how this will take place, and also to prevent, of course, with legal permissions, to prevent the site from getting developed by developers or surpassing, let's say, height limits of certain buildings, or treating the public spaces in a privatizing manner, etc., etc., to prevent that. And then the last one of the elements in the last phase, which is two, is to create the hypercrete creek, which is essentially to create an expo that brings all of this infrastructure, so all of the green surfaces, the landscape, the koisk, which are artist koisks that are made in containers, which are working as art residencies that bring artists across this site, and they're meant to activate the site in their own ways. And also then solar panels that are laid on a canopy kind of tree system that makes the project more self-sufficient to get solar energy. And so this is just to give an idea of the zooming in, when you zoom in on the sites and what happens there. So as I said, each site has certain spaces, parks, and green elements that are, in this case, it's called dynamic archives, preservation, archival, and historical installations. So this site, let's call it a sub-site within a larger site, is supposed to be about historical preservation and archival practices, and it's part of the larger, as I said, quinquennale, which each part has its own theme. Another element within this phasing technique is to very simply just give a visual expression to what happens exactly within this phase. So in this site, the historical site, this is just an idea of what happens where the artists come to practice the Navajo counter maps, which honor drawing practices that the mapping practices that the Native Americans practiced before, and mark essentially the land with paint and other elements. And you can see here in the container, this is where the artist's residencies shelter. This is where the shelters are for the artists, the art residents. And then this is another phase, which is called excavating the asphalt, and it's essentially digging all of the asphalt on the sidewalk to allow for a tactical jungle. This is what it's called, and essentially this is where the street turns into a farm, right? Or the sidewalk and some public spaces underused turn into a farm. And this phase is called natural reclamation, and it's basically leaving when the event goes away, it's essentially leaving those places abandoned to be taken over by nature. This is another site. As I said, it has three sub-sites, and its site is mostly about production, green production and agriculture, and water purification strategies, because as I said, the creek, which is here in red, is highly contaminated. And again, you see these red containers, it's injecting these residencies, these containers where the artists are residing. This shows an element, a part of the site, which is the bridge and what's happening under the bridge. And it shows the energy of the synergy effect where multiple activities happen at the same time, and it opens for an interesting possibility of how these different activities connect. So imagine that you have cows promenading on one lane, above it a beautiful ballerina dancing, and then some agricultural practices happening on another lane, and you're also in direct relation on with the river, which has these floating solar farms. This is another site, and it has basically where the citizens of the area, where the citizens of the area are living in an affordable housing structure. And it's turning a UPS warehouse into these temporary affordable housing structures that also serves the community on the site while generating the event. And finally, this combines everything together, again, back to the counter mapping, which says that the future identity of Newtown Creek is rooted in the mythology of Newtown Creek. That might as well be the methodology of Newtown Creek beyond the myth. And that was the first project. The second and last project I want to talk about is the Catalyst Spine, which a prosthetic agricultural city. It's a similar project that also emphasizes the strategies that I mentioned. And it was in my final semester in my master's studies. So the site was in Puerto Rico and San Juan, and the site was suffering from, again, gentrification and mostly US, basically American rich people coming and buying land and displacing the locals of the city that are renting. And then now you go to San Juan, and most of the property is owned by American wealthy people. And it suffers also from an economic dependency on US subsidized imported foods. And the first thing we were looking at, what is the discourse around the site, and that there are a lot of decolonization efforts to have San Juan a self-sufficient city, and Puerto Rico in general, and depend on its own agriculture and economic infrastructure. Again, it's important to map the actors that could help actualize the project, because you're looking at also funding. We're not just saying, oh, this is a project that a very wealthy company will build, or this is just something that the government will take care of. It's important to look at who could contribute either financially or logistically, etc., etc. And I was looking at the organizations that are at hand, and one of them was a farm that was just a unique, almost by its own operating, and it provides food to local restaurants that serve Puerto Rican food. And it's a self-sufficient farm, and they don't depend on US imported vegetables, fruits, and otherwise. And I thought, okay, this could be interesting to make to scale it up, and not just make this and not just have it operating on its own. So keywords that emerged were decolonization, which is about mitigating gentrification and involving the locals; preservation, which is about preserving the land and giving it back to its original peoples; and then self-sustaining, sustainable living through self-determination. looking at the strategy for this one, it was looking at the historic demolished wall, which was built by the Spanish, right? And this is number one. And in number two, you see that the intention is to connect between the two parts of the city, the left one, the old one, the right one is a more modern part, and make this invisible wall, that's the destroyed historic wall, almost a reverse. So it was a wall, an element that's supposed to separate two parts of the city. Now it's converted into an element that brings together the two sides. And then the proposal is to connect the two sides, left and right, but also to subvert the castle, which is on and page 4 and image 4 on top, and to nest within it an installation that connects this area through a spine all the way to the sea. It's also such an important tool that I've learned to map the systems that you are collaborating with or that you're utilizing. And also this is what spatializes the alliances. Again, if you're collaborating with a certain with actors, with activists, with organizations, what are they doing in space? So it could be an exhibition, it could be a large event. So how is the space transforming, and by whom, right? Who's taking place? So for example, this is an abstraction of the whole site, my intervention and what exists. And you see that there is a cultural center that exists here. So this is a cultural center across along the spine. And I thought this is an organization that could help perhaps fund parts of the project, if not a small part, if not a large part of it. And then the restaurants that are located along the spine, which will give food scrap to the farms, the agricultural installations that I'm designing, and also to give the scraps as fertilizers, and also take products from the farms that as I mentioned before, it was an organization, but now it becomes a system, part of a larger project. And the tourists, of course, are also coming especially in the first stages of the project to give it a financial push, where they can go in and buy local food through this also, again, huge event that takes place in the city. And as you can see there on the right side, there are some elements that are meant to desalinize the water and make it part of the water system, water infrastructure for the project to survive. And you can also see, for instance, the water harvest elements, which are these bioswales, which also prevent floods. And this is just an abstraction because these are there are many of these elements along the site. So on the left, it's the existing assets, the public space, the cultural center, the restaurants, and then on the middle is the proposed strategy, which is essentially an agricultural floating city. Again, the phasing, as you can see, it's a fixed pattern, or let's say a fixed methodology in these two projects. And here you can see that there's negotiating on fundraising in the first part, where the actors are contributing. And then phase 2, it's the structuring and seeding phase. And what it is, it's basically that the locals, the artists, the farmers, etc., are coming to generate to install installations along the spine. And these could be small scale and not very expensive, right? So it's vertical gardens, structures, it's street furniture, it's playgrounds, it's kiosk, it's public toilets. Basically it's to generate essential infrastructure. And then the second event is installing the skeleton on the 4 sites that are along the spine. The 4 sites interventions plus the strips, which are the green programs, which consist of orchards, community gardens, meadow, bioswales, retention ponds, permeable pavement, biogas tanks, cow and chicken farms, turbines, and solar panels. So as you can see, a dense program that is supposed to activate the space. This will take place over the parking area, which with allowing only 1 strip of parking. However, cars can park under the elevated structure as well under certain agreements. And in this event is filling the structures with programmatic stacks. So the steel structure then gets built in 2026 in phase 2. And then in 2030, it's filling the steel structure, which is an installation, with modular residential agricultural units. So there are greenhouses and rooms and community kitchens to be planted within this structure. And then the last phase is about expansion and propagation. And the idea is if this prototype succeeds, if it works, now the mission is how to propagate it and plant it and expand it as a model throughout the city. And this just shows this connection between from the sea all the way to the castle, right? And the green one here where upland, it's the agricultural productive area. In the middle, it's the heart of the city. And you can see the structure is continuing all the way to the castle where this nested pergola exists. And again, programs such as kiosks and public toilets and very simple elements and bioswales exist to make the connection. And this is a section that shows the whole creature. This shows the main elements, the residential hybrid, the productive area on the right side, the leisure pergola that's in the middle, and these are essentially the vital points within the spine. And as it's a large project with many elements, it's always useful to have an arsenal, as I call it, or an inventory of these fragments that you're using, because on and off themselves, they might seem minor, but if you think about it, especially as artists, we can sometimes install something interesting in the city and have it interacting with the locals. It could have some artworks exhibited, but then if you look at the scaling up of it, if other artists are contributing and you're creating a connection with those elements, then you gradually transform the conception of the space and also the use of the space of enough people do it. And it depends then on the radicality of it depends on the type of structure that you're installing. So is it as small as, let's say, a street furniture? Is it where you're installing a whole temporary residential unit? It could be for homeless people, it could be for artists, for a certain event, etc. So it's important to list these small elements that when they agglomerate, it creates a whole system. And this shows part of the residential unit. And it gives you an idea that it's first a very simple structure. It's not supposed to impose a certain identity because the locals are meant to occupy it and turn it into a native landscape. It's a structure, it's a machine, it's a tool right? It's technology, but then the users of this technology are meant to link it to the territory. But then you have, of course, the infrastructure that is provided for them with their contribution, and it's meant to be, of course, a landscape where Puerto Ricans use for self-sufficiency, to live and work, to basically produce vegetables and herbs and dairy, etc., and sell it to the restaurants. There are so many of them in Puerto Rico, but also to eat from that and to use it as a resource for their own well-being. And it shows, as flooding is also an issue there, it shows how the system works. So when the flood floods, is part of the landscape, and it fertilizes the land. And you can see that the infrastructure in the middle, it's meant to be as a bio retention soil, and on the sides there are the sidewalks and the farms on the right and the left. And this shows some potentials of the events that could take place and the actors that could take place, such as the cows, the chicken, and the salsa, as it's famous there. This shows an image from a bird's view image of the hybrid structure. You can see that there's community kitchen, and it's a very dense area. This is called a monumental irony, where very simple moves such as taking the Christopher Columbus statue that's there and turning it upside down to make it, at least to provide shades. And it shows the other part of the spine, which is a public space that's turned into a vertical garden. And this is a pergola that's also in the middle of the spine, where there are bookshelves and seating areas and cafes and kiosks, public toilets. This is it also from another view. And finally, this is almost like a manifesto to give an idea of what this project is. And it says that the catalyst spine acknowledges its fragility, uncertainty, and temporality. Still is a foreign prosthetic organ that has been planted in a native body. While it does not attempt to reconcile, it still brings together the natural and the artificial conditions existing and designed in a constant dialogue and negotiation. It stimulates the native body, the site, to generate maximum resistance, reaction to this new spine, and develops a series of consequent congestion, tension, and relief by adjusting and readjusting its modular system. Hence, it's a machine. Catalyst spine is meant to be stripped of identity, unfinished, and is given to San Juan to inject its own DNA to it through reuse. Thank you.